All right. So pleasure to have the opportunity to do some learning with you. I want to just begin by taking a minute to thank our many sponsors, Dini Kolach, Rosalind Scher, Mark and Chava Finkel, Marilyn Rothschild, Rebecca Potensky and Jeremy Newberger, Shoshana Honigman, Steve Adelsberg, and Erica Grun and Richard Pravda. Thank you to one and all for your sponsorship and for your ongoing generosity. So lovely to be back with you and to have the opportunity to talk about some of our Zionist heroes. Achad Ha'am was last week, Ben Gurion is next week, and today we turn our attention to Zev Jabotinsky. Okay, and hopefully in the email that went out with the link, you received the source sheet. So I'll put up the sources on share screen when we have the opportunity, but feel free to use the source sheet before, during, and after we bring up the sources. So just to remind you, Jabotinsky is born in 1880, and the last decades of the 19th century, as I mentioned at the beginning of last week's session, all kinds of issues are swirling. Nationalism and Haskalah and emancipation, and particularly with the pogroms in Eastern Europe in the 1880s, there's what historians have called the Jewish question. Jews are being persecuted from a religious perspective in Western Europe, especially. Jews are assimilating, and there's all kinds of questions that are brewing about the future of Judaism. One of the nationalist movements that takes off at this time, as you know, is Zionism, and that's one path toward trying to answer in some form or fashion some of the challenges of the moment, and it's into this world that Jabotinsky is born. Okay. He's born on the 17th of October, 1880, into a middle-class Jewish family in the city of Odessa. And I would encourage you, if you have time, to just read up a little on Odessa, because it's such a fascinating and I would say unique city in history and in Jewish history, in the sense that it's the only city in Russia from which Jews were not barred. It's a new city. It's a made up city, which is why Odessa doesn't have. It's not Vilna or Prague. It's not one of these cities with hundreds of years of Jewish history. It's a new environment, and as Hillel Halkin writes in his book, which I recommend, and a lot of the material that I have for tonight's session is from his book. It's the Yale Live series, and it's just called Jabotinsky by Hillel Halkin, Yale University Press, 2014. So Halkin writes, he says, Odessa was never profound about anything. Having no traditions, it didn't fear new ways of life or doing things. Okay, so it's just there. And there's a little of everything going on in Odessa, and everyone can try something new and experiment because, again, it's a little unmoored in the sense that there's no one who's going to come and say, "Oh, we don't do things that way in Odessa. Well, we don't do things any particular way because everything is happening here for the first time." Okay, so just keep that in the back of your mind when you think about Jabotinsky, or you sort of meet someone in the course of Jewish history who has some connection to or some time that they spent in Odessa. Coming from or living in a place like that obviously means something in the larger context. Okay, I said Achad Ha'am spoke a bunch of languages. Jabotinsky spoke even more. At least 6 relatively fluently, and then more beyond that. He was in large measure an autodidact. He became a writer and a foreign correspondent. As I mentioned last week, all the personalities that we're looking at have a literary quality. Okay, Achad Ha'am, Jabotinsky, and Ben Gurion too writes prolifically. So they leave us a lot of material, and I want to spend sort of the second half of our session today actually looking at some of the primary sources that Jabotinsky left us. So we're not just relying on secondhand scholarship, but we actually look at the primary sources themselves. So he's a poet and a playwright, and again a journalist by profession. At the age of 18, he leaves Odessa to study law in Italy and Switzerland. And it's very hard. If you say, where was Jabotinsky in 1902? Like, it's not easy to know the answer. He's always on the move. He is always traveling. And as you'll see, very hard to pin him down to any one location. Okay. So, he's in Odessa, he's in Eastern Europe, and then he's in Italy, and then he's in Switzerland. He's a foreign correspondent for a Russian newspaper in Switzerland. His reports and his articles became well known. And he becomes a very well-known Russian journalist. Comes back to Odessa in 1901. He's 21, and he works for the editorial staff of a local Jewish newspaper. And then, as you know, 1903 is a turning point in a lot of ways in the thinking of a lot of people because of the Kishinev pogrom, which we talked about last time. Kishinev, just to park it in your map mentally, is only about 100 miles from Odessa. Okay, 45 Jews are murdered, 600 or more are wounded or raped, 1,500 Jewish homes and businesses are sacked and looted. And as I mentioned again, it's an international story. It's a showstopper. So Jabotinsky begins to form a Jewish self-defense brigade in Odessa, and he begins to highlight the sense that Jewish strength and Jewish self-defense and Jewish self-reliance have to be our values. Bialik's famous work in the City of Slaughter. Okay, in the City of Slaughter is Bialik's take on the horrors of the Kishinev pogrom, and it grabs the attention of everyone, and the image that everyone walks away with, and it's a true image. The image that everyone walks away with from Bialik's City of Slaughter in the City of Slaughter is the sense of, here's this city, this Jewish community of Kishinev, and these marauders and a pogrom, and the Jews, they're like hiding under the kitchen table. And they have no weapons, and they have no means of self-defense, and they're just sheep to the slaughter. So Jabotinsky is very moved by this event and very moved by this work of Bialik, and he actually translates it into Russian for obviously a very wide audience. And even though he admitted, quote unquote, that he had no inner contact with Judaism, he's grown up Odessa secular Jew. He took leadership in organizing what would become a movement for Jewish minority rights in Russia. Okay, and then he starts a travel episode. He travels the length and breadth of Russia, urging this movement of self-defense. 1904, he's elected as a delegate to the Sixth Zionist Congress. This is the last Zionist Congress that Herzl attends because he dies in July 1904. But this brief moment, Jabotinsky and Herzl interact. And Jabotinsky is mesmerized by Herzl. He's very taken with the idea of political Zionism, as opposed to what we talked about last week, Ahad Ha'am's cultural Zionism. At the Congress, Jabotinsky votes against the Uganda plan for a Jewish national home for reasons we could talk about, but he's very taken with Herzl and this notion of political Zionism. And over the next few years, he becomes active in spreading the Hebrew language and Hebrew culture throughout Russia, and soon becomes basically the foremost Zionist lecturer and journalist in the country. He's like on a perpetual lecture tour. People report that he's like a spellbinding orator, and like a little like Herzl. Like, we're not sure why he's so spellbinding, but we're spellbound. Okay? Like, the message isn't some big chiddush, but we're spellbound by his personality, by his charisma. 1908, he visits Palestine for the first time. After the outbreak of World War One, Jabotinsky's a journalist, so what does he do? He leaves for the front as a newspaper correspondent for a big Russian newspaper, a big Moscow daily. And he gets to Alexandria. Okay, so he's in Alexandria, and he finds in Alexandria. This is a fascinating sort of footnote, but it's not a footnote. It's actually a big part of the story. He finds in Alexandria 6,000 Jewish deportees. What are Jews doing in Alexandria? Why have they been deported? So they're residents of the Ottoman Empire, and if they're from, Eastern Europe, so they're enemy aliens. And the Ottomans say, we don't want you here. And they are exiled from, right, a lot of these Jews exiled from Palestine to Alexandria. Okay. There he meets Joseph Trumpeldor, who, of course, you know about from street names and Jewish history. And together they form what becomes known as Jewish Legion. He, again, is so interested in Jewish strength and projecting the notion of Jewish self-reliance and self-defense. And his goal is to align with the British imperial interests. We're against the Ottomans. Maybe we can fight alongside the British, curry favor with the British. And if, the Brits win the war, we'll be on the right side of history. And maybe we could fill in the end of that sentence. Maybe there could be a place for us Jews in Palestine. Okay. 1917, his recruiting efforts aren't all that successful, but 1917 he finally gets permission from the British government for the creation of a Jewish Legion. Jabotinsky serves as a lieutenant, and they don't really see much action, but there's an early sense that here we are, right? You could really say the Jewish Legion, and I think historians do say this, that it's the first organized Jewish militia, in like 1800 years. There was never such a thing before, and now we're starting to see a new page and a new moment in Jewish history. So, the story, the Balfour Declaration, and the cessation of hostilities at the end of World War One, and during Pesach of 1920, Jabotinsky's back in Palestine, and now he's the head of the Haganah in Jerusalem, trying to defend Jews against Arab riots. And he gets in the middle of this story, and he's condemned by the British mandatory government to 15 years of hard labor for crimes against British subjects. A lot of important people went to his defense. There's a public outcry, and his sentence is basically commuted. He's given amnesty and released from the prison in which he had been serving the sentence in Akko. So now the page turns, and we have the beginning of the, let's say, political career of Zev Jabotinsky and the formation of what becomes known as revisionist Zionism. And Jabotinsky becomes the father of this revisionist Zionist movement. So after 1921, Jabotinsky serves as a member of the Zionist executive, which we'll talk more about when we talk about Ben Gurion next week. And he's one of the founders of the Keren HaYesod, which continues to be an important important part of Israel today. And after a series of policy disagreements on the direction of the Zionist movement, he secedes in 1925 and he establishes his own Zionist movement, the Union of Zionist Revisionists, also known as Hatzohar, which called for the immediate establishment of a Jewish state. So the revisionists come back to the principles of Herzl, to political Zionism, and their idea is we're not interested in waiting around. We're not interested in compromise. We're not interested in partition. The idea is we need to be independent of the English mandate, and we need a Jewish homeland that's just ours, which again is a revolutionary idea at a moment when the majority of Zionists living in Palestine in the 1920s are Ben-Gurion Zionists, socialist Zionists, who are not particularly interested in upsetting the apple cart. So there are different ways to skin the cat, but one way is to think about revisionism as being interested in four objectives. Number one, instead of gradualism, the revisionists are interested in statehood immediately and urgently. Okay, so the mainstream Zionists, the socialists, say you got to build a state over time, and Jabotinsky says we're building a state now. Number two, instead of some form of compromise, the revisionists are interested in maximal territorial claims. So the mainstream says we can negotiate, there could be transfers, there could be swaps, there could be negotiation, there could be partitions. And Jabotinsky says we want a Jewish state on both sides of the Jordan River, what was then mandatory Palestine and Transjordan, right? Like think of biblical Israel. Number three, the socialists are more interested in, let's just say, restraint, or what the socialists called havlaga. And Jabotinsky says we don't need restraint, we need defense. We need a strong, unapologetic military force. That's going to be the answer to our problems. And number four, instead of socialism, Jabotinsky favors a kind of liberal nationalism, like a classical liberalism, individual rights, and not a collectivist, a socialist economy that Ben-Gurion was a champion of, but to use 2026 lingo, this would be a conservative agenda versus a progressive or socialist agenda. 1923, together with Joseph Trumpeldor, Jabotinsky creates Beitar, which is a new youth movement. And again, he appreciates and understands that this process is going to be best achieved by training the next generation. So he starts a new youth movement called Beitar, aimed at educating its young people with a sense of military supremacy and this nationalistic spirit that Jabotinsky believed in. Okay, and we'll come back to Beitar when we look at some of the primary sources. 1928 to 29, and again, it's always hard to know where the guy is, but 1928 to 1929, he's in Palestine. He's working as a journalist. This time he's working for a newspaper called Doar Hayom. And at the same time, he's a political activist. In 1929, we'll come back to this year, it's an important year, he left the country on a lecture tour, at which point the British administration said, we won't be seeing you again, and they denied him re-entry into the country, and not sure if Jabotinsky ever comes back to mandatory Palestine, We'll have to check, but at least from 1929 on, in that short term, he's barred. He's barred from Palestine as an enemy of the state. Okay. Now, why do I say 1929 is such an important year? In 1928, just to provide a little background, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem organized new construction next to and above the Kotel. I'm actually going to make this a little bit of a topic on Tikkun Lel Shavuot, so I'm not going to give too much away, but this is an important moment. 1928, the Grand Mufti organizes new construction next to and above the Kotel. Okay. Mules were driven through the prayer area, and they're given free rein to drop their excrement, and wastewater is thrown at Jews who are trying to worship. A muzin. You know what a muzin is? A muzin is the person in charge of calling the folks to prayer 5 times a day in Islam. So a muzin is appointed directly next to the Kotel. And the idea is to create noise and disturbances exactly when Jews are trying to daven. And the Jews start to protest, and there's provocations and tensions and counter-protests, and it's a mess. Zionists start to make demands. We want control of the Kotel. Some Zionists went as far as to call for the rebuilding of the temple. Okay. Obviously, this inflames the Muslim fears of Zionist revolution. Even Ben-Gurion, who's much more passive than Jabotinsky, even Ben-Gurion says that the Kotel should be redeemed, and he predicts that not too much more time, the Kotel will be ours. During the spring of 1929, the revisionist newspaper Doar Hayom, which is edited by Zev Jabotinsky, that's his newspaper, runs a long campaign claiming Jewish rights over the Kotel and its surrounding area, going as far as calling for insubordination, violence, and pleading that Jews not stop protesting and demonstrating until the Kotel is restored to us. Sometimes these primary sources are a little hard to pin down. I didn't find the Doar Hayom editorial that says, protest until they shoot back. But just to give you, a sense of the rhetoric, I did dig up one headline from August 5th, 1929, and it's source number 1 on your source sheet. I'll put it up on the screen. Okay, so again, a lot of these articles are they appear without a byline, but it doesn't matter because we know who the editor is, and the editor is Jabotinsky. So whether he's writing them or just approving them, right? It's his newspaper, and attributing these words to him is, perfectly understandable. So I hope you could see this. This is source 1. If not, you have it on your source sheet. So, second line, Im hakotel ma'aravi einu merkaz v'semel bishvilam letikvat atidut lavo harei l'chol hapachot hashpa'at merkaz hadma'ot shel ha'am tzricha hayta le'orer otam le'ezeh pulashi. So everything's a polemic, and again, you have the socialists versus the revisionists, and everyone wants their version of Zionism to be the dominant version, because these are idealistic people who believe in their ideals, and everyone is fighting for what they believe in. So, for every one of these editorials on the right, there's a counter editorial on the left, and vice versa. So he says, if the Kotel is not the center and symbol of the future hope of the Jewish people, then at least you have to accept that it's the center of the tears of the Jewish people. The reason we call it the Wailing Wall, okay, it has to at least summon up some sense of deep emotion. And again, this is a secular guy, right? Zev Jabotinsky is not saying this is the Wailing Wall of the Holy Temple, and for religious reasons. It's not to do with religion. This is to do with nationalism, and this is to do with Zionism. He says this is a symbol for us. We have to take this seriously. An attack on the Wailing Walls, an attack on our national identity, and we can't stand for this. It's like, where's the protest? Come on. Right? Okay. וגם ההנהלה הציונות החדשה, אפילו הקואליציונית, גם היא לא תוסיף הרבה. בלי ההכרה המוקדמת הברורה. Because even the organized coalition of the Zionist Party doesn't take enough action. They don't recognize what the value is here. שהכותל המערבי הוא פרט חשוב של הכלל המדיני השורר בארץ. This is part and parcel of our national identity, and you can't possibly think that it's any less. Okay? And the editorial goes on, and you have to take it seriously, and you have to defend it, and you have to protest. And this is emblematic of a months-long campaign by the revisionists to drum up support, drum up protests, and even sometimes implicitly, maybe even sometimes explicitly, to drum up violence in defense of the Kotel. That's August 5th, 1929. August 6th, the British police force in Palestine establishes a police post right next to the Kotel. A week later, on the 14th of August, the Haganah and Brit Trumpeldor hold a meeting in Tel Aviv, attended by 6,000 people, objecting to the British decision that the Kotel was considered to be the domain of the Muslims. There are riots, for the most part, attacks by Arabs on Jews, accompanied by destruction of Jewish property. During the week of riots from the 23rd of August to the 29th of August, 133 Jews are killed by Arabs, and not just at the wall, like throughout Palestine. 339 were injured. Most of the victims are unarmed. So you see what happens. There's an attempt at some kind of, organized resistance. One thing leads to another, and there's a terrible tragedy that ensues. Obviously, those on the left hold Jabotinsky responsible. He's not even in the country, okay? But this is his newspaper, and his reputation takes a hit. The British create a commission of investigations called the Shaw Commission, and it's like 100 years later, nothing changes. Who's responsible? Both sides. Okay? And we're not playing favor. Both sides are responsible. Okay. Now, again, I'm not saying everyone's blameless. We could talk about who's to blame, but the Shaw Commission, right? There's not Jewish riots killing innocent Arabs, right? There are Arab riots where innocent Jews are being slaughtered. The Shaw Commission, 1930, says both sides are to blame. So Jabotinsky he's never in the center, but now he's even more on the periphery of the kind of mainstream Zionist movement in the 1930s in Palestine. Now, 1933, Hitler comes to power in Germany, and again, this just ups the ante. It's like, read the handwriting on the wall. There's still a Jewish problem. There's still the Jewish question. We still haven't figured out where Jews can find safety in this crazy world. As I mentioned in last week's session, already by 1924, the Johnson-Reed Act drastically limits immigration to the United States. So unless you have some backdoor or some special visa or some proviso, very few Jews are able to immigrate post 1924. Now the British are making it difficult to get to Palestine. Where are Jews going to go when the likes of Hitler have taken power? So Jabotinsky is alarmed, and he presses for a worldwide Jewish boycott of Germany. So there's a prophetic quality to this. Like, not everyone was so willing to admit that this was a major moment. Many were, and Jabotinsky was in that camp. The idea was, we're not powerless. Again, that's Jabotinsky's. We are never powerless. We have power. We're going to wield it one way or another. Boycott German products. You can crush Germany economically. Nobody cooperates. There's no boycott of German products. Okay, when I was growing up, my parents still boycotted German products, but by then, that was for another reason. There's this growing divide between Ben Gurion, the leader of the mainstream socialist Zionists, and Jabotinsky on the other side, and the parties finally try to reconcile in 1934, and they meet. And I want to come back to that reconciliation in a few minutes. 1935, after the Zionist executive rejected Jabotinsky's political program and refused to clearly define the aim of Zionism as the establishment of a Jewish state, which is all Jabotinsky wanted. Ben Gurion said no. Jabotinsky leaves the Zionist movement for good, and he founds what's another organization called the New Zionist Organization to conduct independent political activity for the free immigration and the establishment of a Jewish state. 1937. The Irgun becomes a military arm of the Jabotinsky movement, and he becomes its commander. And within the framework that Jabotinsky sets up, more than 40 ships sailed from European ports, bringing to Palestine tens of thousands of illegal immigrants. They're not allowed to be there, but Jabotinsky smuggles them in. And throughout this period of intense political activity, Jabotinsky continues to do what he does. He writes novels and short stories and poetry and articles on politics and social and economic problems, and we'll return to some of his writing in just a moment. From 1939 to 1940, Jabotinsky is active in Britain, the United States, and Europe in the hopes of establishing a Jewish army to fight side by side with the Allies against Nazi Germany. On August 4th, 1940, he was visiting a Beitar camp in New York. He had a heart attack and he died. He's buried in Long Island, and in his will, he requested that his remains be interred in Eretz Yisrael at the express order of the Hebrew government at the Jewish state that will arise. Almost exactly parallel to what Herzl said. He said, bury me next to my father. He died in 1904. He said, bury me next to my father in Vienna, and when there's a Jewish state, take my body, reinter it, bury me in Israel. Jabotinsky said the same thing with absolute certainty. Right? When the Jewish state arises, you take my body and bury me in Israel. And his wish was finally fulfilled by Levi Eshkol, the third prime minister of Israel, 1964. Jabotinsky's remains and those of his wife were reinterred on Har Herzl in Jerusalem. Okay. Let me stop there and just ask if there are questions or comments, and then I want to spend the time that we have remaining on the writings and the primary sources that Jabotinsky left us. Okay. So let's jump right in. There are a couple of pieces that I want to come to, and in the interest of time, we may abridge some of this. But I hope that you've taken the sense that the military component of Jabotinsky's philosophy was central to his thinking and central to his identity. And I want to look with you at a couple of his writings where he talks about what that strength and what that self-reliance looks like. Because this is an essay he wrote in 1910. And he writes the following. He wrote primarily in Hebrew. These are translations. Wise was the philosopher who said that men are wolves to men. Long years will not be enough to change this. Neither political reforms nor cultural remedies nor even the hard lessons of life will do the least good. He who puts his trust in a neighbor, be it the friendliest and most kind-hearted, is a fool. He who trusts in justice is one too. Justice exists for those with the physical power and persistence to appropriate it for themselves. When I'm accused of preaching national separateness, distrust, and other such things that are offensive to delicate minds, I am tempted to answer, I plead guilty as charged. I indeed preach all this and will continue to. Separateness, distrust, vigilance at all times, a club in one's hand at all times. There is no other way to survive the war of the wolves. Ben Gurion called him Hitler. And not a few people called him a fascist. And it's not difficult to see why he would have attracted those kinds of rebukes. But he stood by his principles. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and we're not powerless to do anything about it. If we want to stand up for our rights and our future, we need to stand up for our rights and our future. And the only way to do that is with a literal or metaphoric club in our hand. Source 3, he says, the newspapers and various rumors have misconstrued me as calling for a Jewish army that will conquer Palestine all by itself. It's not my interest. All that is ridiculous. What I'm thinking of is this, and this was in the early days. When one day a peace conference is convened, an item on the agenda will be the dismemberment of Turkey, pre-World War I. My whole plan is based on that, and that's why he joined the British. The parts of Turkey to be divided up, including Palestine, will already be under military occupation. He's right. In Palestine, I imagine some 20,000 soldiers will be needed. That's for garrisoning the country during peace negotiations, not for conquering it. My goal is to have a reasonably large Jewish unit form a third to half of this number. When I'm openly called a militarist, I think of that night. This is a new source number 4, which is just a caveat or an asterisk next to this sense that Jabotinsky is all military all the time. He says, when I'm openly called a militarist, I think of that night and that road in the Jordan Valley, and I refuse to say it wasn't worth it. There was a Turkish prisoner that they were moving, and he couldn't travel anymore, and the Turkish prisoner ended up dying or maybe even being put to death under his watch. Okay. And he wrote about this many years later, and he says it's an awful thing, the life of a nation. It's hard to keep going in the wilderness. You can't. Then lie down and die. Humanity is a battalion too, and no one is going to carry you to Jericho. You either march on with all the cruelty to yourself and others that this calls for, or you give up and are swallowed by oblivion together with all your hopes. It haunted him, the fact that he had to take a life, or that a life was taken under his watch. And there's this. There's a sense of contradiction, and there are contradictions in his writings, and it evolves over time. But his sense of using force and using brute force isn't for the sake of using force; it's for the sake of being able to defend yourself and having enough strength or perceived strength that your enemy doesn't attack you. So when he actually had to use it and he actually had to take a life, right, it haunted him. It haunted him forever. Golda Meir's famous line, to paraphrase, we can forgive the Arabs for murdering our boys, but we can't forgive the Arabs for turning our boys into killers. Something like that. So that's a hard place to be. right? We want to be on the defensive. We want to have enough strength to know that no one's going to attack us. Sometimes we have to actually be on the defense or be on the offense and engage, and that's a very difficult moment. And for Jabotinsky on a personal level, it was exceptionally difficult. Okay, a couple more quick sources on this point, and then we'll move past it. One of his most famous and seminal articles was an article he wrote called "The Iron Wall" in 1923. Okay. And in the Iron Wall, Jabotinsky makes the case that we're going to have to come to terms with the Arabs, and the only way to do that is through strength. Source 5. He says, contrary to the good rule of beginning an article with the crux of the matter, I begin this one with an introduction and a personal one too. The author of these lines is considered an enemy of the Arabs, a proponent of driving them out, etc. It's not true. My emotional attitude toward the Arabs is the same as to any other people's. Respectful indifference. I don't care about them. My political attitude is dictated by two principles. First, I consider driving the Arabs out of Palestine in whatever form absolutely impossible. There will always be two peoples in Palestine. Second, I am proud of belonging to the group that formulated the Helsingfors program. We formulated not for the Jews alone, but for all peoples, and is the basis of equal rights of nations. That's his manifesto. There are 15 million of us in the world, 15 million Jews. Half of them live the life, literally, of a homeless dog, chased from place to place. There are 38 million Arabs. They occupy Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Tripoli, Egypt, Syria, Arabia, Mesopotamia, a space, not including desert, that is equivalent in size to half of Europe. In general, across that vast territory, there are 16 Arabs per square English mile. By comparison, it's useful to remember that in Sicily, there are 352 people per square mile, and in England, 669. You did the math. It's even more useful to remember that Palestine consists of approximately 1 part of 200 parts of this territory. But when homeless Jews call for a homeland in Palestine, this is considered immoral because it inconveniences the natives. So he's holding two truths. There's Arabs and they're not going anywhere. And we need a homeland, and we're not asking for that much. Tiny little space. Human cohabitation is built on reciprocity. Take away reciprocity and a right will turn into a lie. The person who just walked past my window has a right to live only insofar as he recognizes my own right to live. Back to Hobbes. If he wants to kill me, I do not recognize his right. This pertains to other nations as well. The world would become a furious rat race otherwise, where both the weak and the small among us would perish. We can only survive in a world of mutual responsibility. We must live in a world marked by equality. When death comes, it comes to all equally. There is no ethic which allows the greedy satisfaction while the modest die under offense. So he says in this article, and you could Google it, I think the whole thing's online. There's a need for an iron wall of unassailable Jewish strength. It's not a literal wall, but it's this position of overwhelming political and military security that cannot be broken by Arab resistance. Only when the Arab population, he writes, becomes convinced that Jewish settlement is permanent and cannot be reversed, that they will shift from resistance to negotiation. So it's important to recognize he doesn't reject compromise in principle. He insists that once the iron wall has been established, once hope of defeating Zionism disappears, like we're here, we're not going anywhere, moderate Arab leaders, he hoped, will emerge who would be willing to negotiate. Okay, at that point, he supports granting full civil and national rights to the Arabs within a Jewish state, but negotiation, in his view, can only come after strength, not before. Okay, and there's a stark realism in this essay, and so much of it continues to reverberate in 2026. The premise of his philosophy is somebody, whoever it is, the opponent, the enemy, the Arab state, somebody needs to recognize that this is a Jewish state, that we're here and we're not going anywhere. And it's amazing that 100 years later, I think it's the overwhelming majority of the Middle East, still fails to recognize that Israel is a sovereign Jewish state. It's stunning. Right? That's all he wanted. Like, just start with that premise, and then we'll negotiate. And now there's a few, right? You got Egypt and Jordan and the Abraham Accords. So yeah, there's some, and most still have not accepted the sense that the Jewish population of Israel is not going anywhere. Okay. Let me pause there and just ask if there are any questions before we start to wrap up.
Rabbi?
When did Begin form his alliance with Jabotinsky, and when did he become the leader of the revisionists?
So Begin is really post Jabotinsky. Begin comes onto the scene in the 40s after Jabotinsky is already dead. So Jabotinsky is the father of the movement, and Begin, you could say, is an heir. Yeah.
Rabbi, when Jabotinsky was, like, I guess it was around 1940, 41, trying to develop opposition to Germany, where does it come chronologically with the British formation of the Jewish Brigade? And would he have, if he had those thousands of followers, would he have encouraged them to join the Jewish Brigade in the British Army?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah, but he dies so early.
Yeah.
That it never takes off.
Did he approve of Trumpeldor's admiration for martyrdom?
Also a good question that I don't know the answer to. I certainly never came across anything in his writings that suggested that he did, but he was a partner of Trumpeldor, and Trumpeldor is a complicated guy. Maybe the subject of another session.
Is it a coincidence that he had a Trump support?
Say again?
Is it a coincidence that he had a support of somebody whose first name was Trump?
I never put together the coincidence of Trumpeldor's, the first 5 letters of Trumpeldor's last name. I never thought about that until this moment.
Thank you.
Okay, to be revisited. Okay, I want to just say a quick word about Beitar, and then I want to look at the correspondence between Ben Gurion and Jabotinsky, and then wrap up. Okay, so if you remember, Beitar was Jabotinsky's youth movement, and the whole idea of Beitar was that we would train Jewish youth to stand up tall, literally and figuratively. I'll just read you one line. You have it in source number 7. I won't put it on the screen. He said, Beitar is also austereness. Guard the purity and grandeur of your lives like the Nazarites of old. Let this be your credo. Grandeur, right? Hadar is everything in your speech and in your behavior and in your relations with your friends and enemies, with Jews and Gentiles, with women and children and the elderly. Treat your work, whether behind a desk or outdoors in a private or public capacity, as something sacred. Be a weapon, strong and sharp in times of danger. Be exemplars of courtesy and honesty in your daily lives in society. And like maybe chivalry is kind of the closest approximation of this sense. Carry yourself, and again, he's polemicizing against 2,000 years of Jewish victimhood and the sense that Jews are objects rather than subjects. Be a subject. Stand up for what you believe in. Be proud of who you are. Know that you have the strength to defend yourself, and act in a way that brings honor to yourself, your nation, and your people. That was his whole Beitar youth movement. Okay. I just want to come back because I've been so struck by this. It's sources 8, 9, and 8, 9, and 10 in your source sheet. So it's 1934, and Jabotinsky and Ben Gurion are at each other's throats. The movement is split. We had this political roundtable last night, and we always lament and talk about we live in polarized times, and we're long for the days when people could reach across the aisle and bipartisanship and get things accomplished together. And it's a wave function. And there are moments of great, unity, and there are great moments of great fracture. And I just come back to this short correspondence because it's so beautiful, and it should just give us hope. Okay, this is the ideologues at each other's throats. You couldn't come up with. I'm not going to try to make it, 21st century equivalents, but just take the most ideological, ideologue on the right and the opposite on the left, and they disagree about everything. Source number 8, Ben Gurion and Jabotinsky on your source sheets. Here it is. Source number 8, they have a correspondence. Ben Gurion writes, I hope you won't be upset with me if I address you as a comrade. Notice, instead of socialist. As a comrade and friend without the ceremonial title. We parted yesterday after 15 consecutive hours of intensive work. I'm not a sentimental man, nor do I think you are. I haven't bared my heart to you, and I won't do so now. Yet whatever happens can never change the fact that we two met in reciprocal trust and respect, that we managed for many hours to put everything behind us, and that our deep concern for the Zionist movement and its success led us to make this joint effort. Shkoach, we're at least trying to fight on the same team. Jabotinsky responds, my dear friend Ben Gurion, I just received your letter of yesterday. And again, just keep in mind everything we've seen about Jabotinsky and his militancy and his stand tall and don't come. I just received your letter of yesterday. It's difficult for me to tell you what an impression it made on me. It so happens that I am sentimental and not in the least ashamed of it. But it's much more than sentimentality that causes me the deepest emotion when after all these years, and what years, been fighting like cats and dogs, I hear the words comrade and friend from you. I had long ago forgotten that such a way of speaking exists, and perhaps I've been the cause of its being forgotten between us. One final note in that correspondence from the following year. He says, one short philosophical note. This has been Jabotinsky writing to Ben Gurion. I can vouch for there being a type of Zionist who doesn't care what kind of society our state will have. I'm that person. If I were to know that the only way to a state was via socialism, or even that this would hasten it by a generation, I'd welcome it. More than that, give me a religiously orthodox state in which I would be forced to eat gefilte fish all day long, but only if there were no other way, and I'll take it. By the way, Jabotinsky had a sense of humor, Ben Gurion had none. More even than that, make it a Yiddish-speaking state, which for me would mean the loss of all the magic in the thing. If there's no other way, I'll take that too. In the will I leave my son, I'll tell him to start a revolution, but on the envelope, I'll write, to be opened only 5 years after a Jewish state is established. I've asked myself several times if these are my true feelings. I'm certain they are. I find it very moving and very powerful, especially after learning and studying and just sort of immersing yourself in the idealism. There's no other word. He believes it with every fiber of his being. This is who I am, and this is what I fight for, and I resign, and I start my own movement, and whatever it takes to, right? Because I believe so deeply that this is what matters. If you told me I could give it all up just to get a state, sign me up. I'll eat gefilte fish every day and speak Yiddish. If that's all that it takes, I'm in. Okay, which I think is actually stunning. Conclude with the final paragraph, and this is from the end of Halkin's book. He wrote the biography, so he gets to have the final word. This is what he says. Jabotinsky was a man of contradictions. He had enormous literary talent and wrote a vast amount, most of it journalism and political polemic, in which this talent was but dimly reflected. He dedicated himself to a people and a land that he never found particularly attractive. Firm believer in individualism, he developed a philosophy of revolutionary Zionism that called for the utter subordination of the individual to the group. He abhorred fascism, yet founded a political party and youth movement that were repeatedly accused of it. Everybody called him a fascist. In his personal relations with others, he scrupulously treated them as equals. As political leader, he allowed a personality cult to form around him. The author of a novel that condemned the loss of the concept of the forbidden, he sanctioned the spilling of innocent blood. It's hard to reconcile the contradictions of Jabotinsky, and sometimes they're irreconcilable. But I hope at least in the time that we've spent together, we've at least picked up a sense of who this man was and the kind of reactions that he generated. I'll just say to close, like food for thought and relevance of Jabotinsky's legacy for 2026 and beyond. 4 quick takeaways. Number 1, Iron Wall, the realism, the tough grappling with reality and moral clarity. Let's not pretend that Arabs will consent to our demands. We have to acknowledge the conflict honestly, rather than mask it with idealism, as I mentioned about Ahad Ha'am, those early years of the 1900s, like, oh yeah, we'll have a Jewish state. And Arabs, we never even thought about. No, this is a real people, and this is a real ideology, and these are people who disagree with us, and we have to come to terms with it. Number 2, peace through strength. This is really number 1. Peace through strength, an embrace of political Zionism. We can be the arbiters of our own destiny. We don't have to be acted upon. We can actually decide what the next chapter looks like. Number 3, an embrace of dignity, pride, noble bearing. We don't need to cower anymore. And number 4, just because maybe I'm a rabbi, but I'm particularly moved by the reconciliation with Ben-Gurion. Not everything is about winning the political game, and sometimes there's a greater good, a national interest that can supersede partisanship. And wow, wouldn't it be extraordinary if we found a couple of politicians who could have a correspondence like like Ben-Gurion rather, and Jabotinsky. As is the case for those who tend toward a black and white version of reality, Jabotinsky won a lot of adherents and generated a lot of opposition. Ben-Zion Netanyahu, the father of Israel's current prime minister, was a student of Jabotinsky, and his influence on Israeli politics continues to be felt very strongly to this day. Whether or not we agree with his politics, my contention is that 3 or 4 generations after his passing, he still has a lot to teach us. I'm going to stop there because it's 9:15 and we are out of time, but I am more than happy to stay on and take questions or comments, and we'll look forward to talking about Jabotinsky's bitter rival, Ben-Gurion, 1 week from today. Question? Yeah, Professor. Professor Finkel, I lost you. Okay, in the meantime, Judy and Bob.
I'm just wondering, in I think it was the next to the last piece from his letters that you read, where he talked, if I had to do this for a Jewish state, I would do it, etc.
Yeah.
Had he lived, where would he have come out in 1948, 47, 48 on partition?
Where would he have come out on partition? That's a good question. What do you think?
I don't know. He sounded so uncompromising on that point, and yet, on the other hand, he was so adamant about the need for the Jewish state. I'm thinking that, his philosophy of, we have to be strong and they will meet us on our terms might have made him accept partition on the theory that as the years would pass, the situation would change.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I think that would be exactly my guess.
Why don't you take his class now?
Yeah.
Yes,
Any other
you asked him.
Thank you.
questions or
Rabbi.
comments?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure, Erica.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Fascinating. Very fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I should go back out of here.
A lot of people trying to turn off